All right, welcome back. I am very excited to introduce our next presenter, in no small part because, like me, she's also a Minnesotan, although I swear I had no idea about that until we were chatting in the behind the scenes room here. But I'm very excited to have Heidi with us, and this talk is one I've been waiting for, so I'm really enjoying, getting ready to enjoy this. So, Heidi, have at it, and let's go represent Minnesota well today, please.
It's always fun to be part of the thriving Minnesota technical scene. In case any of you all are wondering, we do have something up here besides snowflakes and mosquitoes. My name is Heidi Waterhouse, and I'm a transformation advocate at LaunchDarkly. What that means is I work to help organizations understand how they can work through the changes that they need to make to their business processes using technology so that they can get better business outcomes. And what that means on another level is that I actually get paid to study nerdy history. And so this talk is a nerdy history talk about things that you already know and use all the time, but maybe hadn't thought about how they got there. So it's called The One Best Way is Continual Improvement. And to start off, you need to know that one best way it's not a trademark phrase, but it is a significant phrase. What is the best way to do something? This is a question we've been trying to answer since anyone taught anyone else how to do something. It only makes sense to teach the best procedure for doing something if you're going to teach them at all. But what is best? Is it fastest, most beautiful, most durable? Is it what's safest to create or use? Whatever the one best way is, it has to have a definition of best. So as we go through this, I want you to think about what's going to be best for your organization, both your team and your company as a whole. So we don't know necessarily what is best. Sorry. I have angered the demo gods. I love life. I'm doing great. All right, let's see if I can get back to where I need to be. That was definitely not it. All right. Bear with me just a moment, folks, because you're going to see all of my slides. And we're just going to go with that. And when we put this on the video, we're going to take it out. So this is the industrial age. So much is changing as the conversation about what the one best way is. Ford is inventing basically mass market production and taking business law places that we never expected it to go. And all sorts of people that you've heard of, like Gantt of the Gantt chart, and Taylor of Taylorism, and Lillian and the Gilbreths are all working through what it is that we need to teach people in order to industrialize effectively. We call this generally scientific management, and it was a real question 100 years ago. We didn't know how to tell people how to do something in a way that wasn't an apprenticeship. So what we were doing was saying, okay, this person seems to know what they're doing. We're going to give them a younger person to learn how they're doing it. But this linear transmission doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best of everything that's possible in the industry. Historically, there's this story about Taylor walking into a factory and finding the person who performed a procedure best, and then training everybody else to do the procedure the same way, because he was really focused on efficiency. The Gilbreths cared a lot about efficiency. This is a picture of a woman performing a factory task, or this might have been from the time that they were watching cashiers in department stores. But she's performing a task. She has lights on her head and her hands, so we can see all of the things that she's doing, all of the motions she's making, and coordinate them in time and space so that we can understand whether a motion is wasted or whether it's useful. This is astonishing. Like, the idea of taking these films and syncing it up and using them to teach other people to be more efficient at scale is super exciting. when we do this, we want to make sure that we're being efficient and having standards. You want to have standards for what is good enough. And when I say you need to decide what is best, you need to know if you want what's cheapest or what's most durable or what is available using only the materials that I can get in the factory. You have to define that in order to define best. But once you've defined best, then you can teach it. So efficiency and standards really came a long way. Like all of mechanized, industrialized manufacturing is dependent on the ability to agree on what a millimeter is and say, I've ordered parts that are 3 millimeters and they're going to be 3 millimeters when they get here. It's important to have set standards so that we can not only move parts between different companies, but also move workers. So the one best way is what we want people to do. We figured out the way we want things to go. We want to teach this, and we want to make sure they don't do the wrong thing. So it's teachable in a couple different ways. Like we can model the right behavior, and we also want to prevent the wrong behavior. A classic way to prevent wrong behavior is to punish people for doing the wrong thing. But what the Gilbreths found, and what we keep finding over and over again as we do psychological studies, is that punishment does not actually make anybody smarter or more creative or better at their job. Instead, what it does is make them anxious and more prone to make errors or take smaller chances. And that's kind of a problem, especially if we're working in this hybrid industrial creative industry like we are. So one of the things that we've brought over is something called poka-yoke. And it is designing the system so you can't screw it up. It seems really intuitive, but anybody who has ever tried to plug USB 2 in the wrong way and gotten no response and turned it around and gotten no response and turned it around and finally gotten it to work understands that it would be useful, and in fact was useful, for us to have USB connectors that either were decidedly sighted or didn't care which way they got put in. So poka-yoke, the best example I have is you can't turn on your car without stepping on the brake. There is nothing in the ignition process that inherently requires you to be pressing the brake. However, if you're pressing the brake, you are unlikely to turn the car on and accidentally go through the garage. I mean, backwards sometimes, but most of the time we get in the car and we know it's not going to start if we don't have our foot on the brake. So we put our foot on the brake, and we prevent so many accidents this way because you can't start it. Your dog can't start the car because they can't step on the brake and turn the ignition at the same time or press the button, God help us. So this is a thing that we use to make sure that people are performing the one best way, is to design our systems so that they are fault intolerant, not in that they fail, but in that you just can't do the wrong thing. How did we get from the Ford factory and industrialized 1920s America to software? Like, why am I talking to you about people who invented slide rules, right? Well, transition was not pretty. This is Tokyo in the summer of 1945. There's not much left. We have bombed it into rubble. And there are no factories, and there are no young men to work the factories. And we realized that we were responsible for helping rebuild Japan because we had destroyed it. And a country needs an industrial base to be a contributing member of the global economy. So we did this, and then we went and tried to fix it. And it was interesting because they were starting from scratch all over again. It's not like Japan hadn't had industrial manufacturing. Of course they did, like we saw it. It's that they didn't have it anymore. So one of the things we did was called training within industry. And this actually started domestically in the United States when we started selective service and we started drafting young men out of factories. We still needed the factories, and we needed the factory manufacturing even more than we had before, but we also needed the young men. So what we did was set up a really mindful, conscious training program of how to train people who had not been oriented toward factory work, like women or less abled people, into how to do factory work and other kinds of things. And fun fact, we used to have universal childcare. It was for factory workers, and it was in World War II. And then we got rid of it because there were too many workers and we wanted women to go back to doing childcare. It's possible. I'm just saying, if we really need it, we can figure it out again. So training within industry was something that we taught ourselves domestically and then took to Japan to talk to them about how to understand their processes and how to set it up. And because there was very little legacy, we did this all with scientific management and like the most cutting edge stuff that we could do, stuff that we couldn't really do domestically because we would call it technical debt, because there was all this legacy behavior and process and tooling and factories. All of this stuff was in our way for innovating. What came back out of Japan in the 80s was Kaizen and the Toyota production system. Kaizen means change for the better. One time or continuous, large or small, it doesn't matter. What we mean in software when we say Kaizen is continuous change for the better. It doesn't matter how large or small it is, as long as we keep getting better at what we're doing. And you've heard about the Toyota production system here and there. You've been taught bits of it. This is what we call lean now. It's certainly the foundation of Agile, the idea of an andon cord to stop production because of a problem. All of this comes out of the Toyota production system. It's a really fascinating set of articles to read. Like, if you could design ideal processes, what would they look like? And so this turns into lean manufacturing and agile software. The idea that we're doing more just-in-time stuff, that we're doing smaller batches, that people have more autonomy, that we're not planning everything out ahead of time, but rather setting goals and then figuring out how to reach them. Because the problem with software, when I started, was that it took 3 years from having an idea to being able to put it on the physical manifestation of a save icon and then put it in your computer. And if you were doing the Lotus Smart Suite, it was 26 disks that you put in your computer. Those were the days, my friend. We didn't have the ability to do a rapid feedback system because if you only released every 2 or 3 years, you had to make sure it was right. There was no way to update it. And so you spent even more time on QA because there was no way to fix it once it was out there. If you introduced a fatal bug, your software was just fatal. Like, there's no way around it. There was no over-the-wire fixes. And when you think about that, it totally makes sense why we had waterfall development method, because we really needed that process to make sure everything was getting in and everything was getting checked. But in a world of, like, we can operate over the wire and we can deliver small increments, it's not as effective for us anymore. So when we think about how we're doing this, I want us to think about whether we have a waterfall development process or a fountain. Because if Agile is lean, is Toyota, is Kaizen, where's the continuous improvement? So often we set up Agile teams that release things and never find out how they happen, how they hit, what goes on afterwards. I've certainly been on those teams, and I bet you have too, where your product owner says, "Good job, here's your next project." And you never see what happens afterwards, whether or not it worked. Like, maybe at the end of the quarter, you have a little party, but we're not getting that continuous feedback. That's an essential part of the Kaizen process. We can't improve if we don't know how it's fitting for other people, if we don't know how it's working. Where is our ability to do that? And why did we forget that part of it? What we need instead of a waterfall is this fountain where even if we're getting limited data, we're still getting some kind of feedback that siphons into itself. This fountain won't run forever because we don't really have like infinite machines, like perpetual motion isn't a thing, but it will run quite a long time on very little power because of all of the siphon action. And so even if we're getting very small pieces of feedback, we can still run a lot of improvement on them. So continual improvement. What do I mean by that? Well, we can't go faster if we're scared. I want everybody to go faster. If you haven't already read Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren and Jess Humble and Jean Kim, I really encourage you to do that because it's such an important way to understand why going faster is in fact safer than going more slowly. In this world, it is safer to go faster, which is so counterintuitive that we really struggle with it. But we can't do that if we're scared. And the analogy I use for this is learning to ride a bike. When you're a little kid and your parent is pushing you on your bike and they say, okay, if you pedal fast enough, you're going to stay up. And you're like, except I know how concrete works and I know how falling works. And I know that it hurts more when I've been running and I fall. So that seems wrong. I don't believe you. What the parent knows, of course, is that there's like angular momentum and conservation of physics. Actually, we don't know very exactly why bikes work, but bikes work. And so we're saying go faster, and the kid is saying that seems dangerous. And we know more. And we know from the studies in the Dora report and Accelerate that going faster is safer. And that's part of the feedback loop that we need to incorporate, but we can't do it if we're scared. So how do we get over being scared about speed? You want to measure what matters because measurement changes state. And we're all aware of this. Like we've all had OKRs that say like you have to write 2 things and then we write 2 really crappy things, but at least we fulfilled our objectives and key results. Or when I'm parenting and I say you have to wash your hands, and the way I check is I touch the bathroom towel and see if it's wet. Well, sometimes the kid is just going to get the towel wet and not actually wash their hands. And sometimes as workers, when we're asked to do something on measurement, we do the thing for the measurement and not what the underlying goal is. So when you're setting metrics for measuring how you're going faster or what's going on, you need to make sure that you're using a good proxy for what you actually want to have happen. Because change is expensive. Change is emotionally expensive because we have to be uncomfortable and learn new things. And change is actually financially expensive. Like every time Microsoft Word changes, the US Army spends something like $6 million retraining everybody who uses it, how to use it again. So change is not like, we're not irrationally afraid of change. It is expensive. But stasis is also dangerous. I bet most people here bought a computer from somebody who doesn't make computers anymore because they got beaten, because they stopped innovating and coasted on what they were doing right. And now it's all sort of, I guess I'll buy a computer from somebody who's actually innovating. We need to remember that it is our job to retool or else. This is the Ford Ranger plant in St. Paul. As it looked in 2012, it is now a really, really big empty lot. We're still fighting about what kind of parks or housing we're going to put up on it, but they tore it down because nobody was buying Ford Rangers anymore. I have to tell you, I looked at the Ford Maverick electric hybrid that's coming out next year. It looks a lot like a Ford Ranger to me, but in the intervening 10 years, we didn't have use for a big plant like that was not making the kind of trucks that people wanted. So every time we resist change, we take this risk of obsolescence. So what do I mean by feedback? Like which kinds of feedback matter? I want something that is both fast enough to be relevant and something I can act on fast. If your feedback for me is like, I wish you were taller, that's not useful feedback because I can't act on it very fast. Like I can try and take some posture lessons, but it's not really going to happen. So when you're asking for feedback, make sure it's something actionable that you can do something about. And we want it to be accurate. We've all sat in the product meeting where somebody says, I think users want. You don't know. You don't know. At the moment you said, I think users want, I stopped listening to you, because unless you are bringing me sheets of data from actual users, you're just hypothesizing, and I don't know why I should believe you. So when you're collecting feedback, make sure it's actual feedback from people who are at the pointy end of the stick of whatever you're doing. And then you want to weight it. I want to collect all the feedback, but some of it is more useful than other feedback. Some of it is like, I hate your font. Okay, thank you. I heard that. You hate my font. I'm not going to do anything about it because it's less important to me than this crashes whenever I don't have cell signal. Well, okay, that's actually something I need to address. So when you get feedback, remember to weight it. Not all feedback is the same or is equally valuable. Only make bets that you can afford to lose. When you're making big changes in your product, it's very frightening because you don't know whether people are going to like it or not, whether it's going to be safe, whether it's going to cause a breaking change. The analogy I like to use here is penny slots. If you have $10,000, you are not going to lose it all in one night playing penny slots, because you're making tiny incremental bets. If you play at like $100 table blackjack, you could absolutely walk away without $10,000. But if you're playing penny slots and making these tiny incremental bets, you know what's happening and you're not betting more than you can afford to lose. So when you think about how to do this, make sure your bets are smaller. Make your changes smaller and more rapid, because it's easy to look over a single like pull request that's 15 lines. That's easy. You can get extra eyes on it. It's not like somebody has to take half the day to review it. You can push it out and you can see how it affects people. That's what I mean by like small, continuous Kaizen kind of improvement. So what does that mean architecturally, since here we are talking about architecture? You want to reduce the following factors. You want to reduce your release scope. You want to make sure that you are releasing only the things that are useful and only to the people who want them. You want to reduce your feedback time. You want to be able to see what's happening in near real time. If people are really hating the blue button instead of the green button, you could see that drop on a chart. Okay, that's useful data. And you want to reduce the change expense. You want to make sure that everything you do is easy to roll back, easy to take out, easy to hide. Because whatever change you make, if it's not the right one, you want to be able to roll it back without having to do a whole redeploy, because those are kind of dangerous. And you want to increase the autonomy of people who are responding to feedback, the autonomy of teams and individuals who are trying to make the right thing. You want to say, hey, look, here's our general goal. How do you meet it? And you want to increase the automation, because there's a lot of toil in development that we don't need to be doing. There are a lot of things that we've solved with libraries, but we need to keep moving toward like what is actual knowledge work and what is repetitive work, and spend our energy and time on things that are actually knowledge work. And we want flexibility. We want to be able to say, we're going to deliver this to some people and not other people. We're going to release this partially or gradually or do a canary release. We want to make sure that we're increasing the flexibility of how we do releases so that we can be continually improving it. So if this talk was too long and you read Twitter instead because it's right there in front of you, or maybe your work email, oh, virtuous one, the only way to be right is to keep changing. You're never right except right at that moment. Otherwise, you have to keep moving and keep changing and keep improving. If you'd like more information on this talk or anything else, you can contact me at launchdarkly.com/Heidi. I'm going to be taking questions for a while after this, and I'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Heidi. And I do encourage everyone to follow her over into the Q&A and continue the discussion. I do want to say that as soon as she mentioned the USB-A, and I cannot remember, I mean, I lose track of how many times I've inserted it, didn't work, flip it over, didn't work, flip it back, now it worked. I mean, seriously, I want to meet the engineer that came up with that. But in the meantime, let's take a quick break. Again, stretch your legs, hit the restroom, top up your beverage of choice, and we will be back with a talk about quantum computing.